click, 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 click. These little orbit sprinklers are pretty awesome, but they have a notoriously big problem with a couple of the gears inside them. I'm going to show you how to fix this problem. Alright, so we're going to tear this tractor down, and we're going to need for the job probably a pair of needle nose pliers, maybe a pair of vice grips, possibly a spring retainer pliers, and a 3/8 Allen wrench, as well as a 5/16 nut driver. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the arms on the tractor. I'm just going to hold the hex nut with a pair of needle nose pliers and spin the arms counterclockwise. Okay. Next, down inside that black collar there, we have this 3/8 Allen wrench that we're going to jam down inside. Find it, and usually they're finger tight. You might need yourself a 3/8 ratchet or something to put a little more pressure on there. I hand tighten these down when I'm done afterwards though. Okay, at this point where we can flip the tractor over and remove the gearbox. And it's not too difficult. Sometimes there's these little tabs here that have these posts in that can kind of get stuck, but with enough little wiggling back and forth, you don't necessarily want to pry because of course they can break off. With a little convincing, it'll come. And there it is. Okay, so we're going to take a look at each of these gears and kind of the ones that I find that go bad the most. So you can take the wheels actually come right out. And the gear that I find goes bad the most often is this guy right here. And I'll take that out and show you what that looks like. The second gear that goes most often is actually this collar here. I'll show that in just a few moments as well. That can go bad. And the third gear that I find goes most often is this guy that's on this slide shaft here. This smallest gear, that one goes as well. So first thing we can do is just remove this axle that's down inside. I just put a finger down in here, pull up, and then this little shifter, it just kind of slides out underneath it, and then we're good to go. It comes out of the way. Okay, so these gears are easy to remove and to replace. The ones that are a little more difficult are on the wheel axle here, and the reason is they've got these retainer clips that you either have to cut off or you have to use I find a pair of vice grips. If you want to reuse them, you can use a pair of vice grips, clamp down on top of this, and as you are pulling up on those vice grips, you also want to turn it because there's these little tabs in here that if you can kind of get them to thread off, you can reuse these caps again. So I'm going to try the vice grip method here. It hasn't failed me yet. It's just really, really difficult sometimes. So you want to get a good grip on this. Need a bit more pressure than that. Just a good grip on the end of the nut. I'm going to have to do this off camera because I got to put a lot of torque on this thing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out as I'm turning this nut. Okay. Oh my gosh, that's never come off that easy before. So that was really, really easy to do. Usually it's not that easy. Usually you have to pull quite hard and actually rotate as you turn it, and it will come. I've pulled, I don't know, tens of these things off this way. This one came off really, really easy though. So sometimes, and again, there's just these little tabs down in here that lock onto this collar. Here, let's take this wheel off here. So I'm just going to take a quick hammer to this. So just going to punch that axle through the wheel, and you can see this shaft is notched right there. That's where this clip actually sits in. Okay, so those little tabs that are in there, they just kind of, if you pull and twist at the same time, eventually they can kind of thread off. If you don't have success with that, then what you can do is go buy yourself a snap ring, and I believe these are 7/16 snap rings from my kit here, but these little snap rings will actually go right onto that shaft with your pliers. So again, when you get that wheel on afterwards, then take your snap ring pliers and you can place it on there, and then it will actually retain the wheel for you. So no problem, you can cut those things off, no big deal. Okay, once we have that all off, we are then going to take this little shaft that's here, this key here, and we're going to pound this out. Now, it's probably easier one way than the other. You can see it's sticking out on the top a little bit more than it is on the bottom. So I'm going to hit on the bottom here. Okay, so that came out, just took a little drill bit, little countersink drill bit, and kind of touched it through there just to make sure that that little key came out of that shaft. So after those are out, you can now remove everything on this axle, and we can remove the collar, the slide gear shaft, and this big power gear here. We can maybe pull that off sometimes. So it's got a little key down inside here that can be a little bit more difficult to pull off. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a hammer or something to punch through. So I'm going to hold this gear and hit it with a little hammer here. There it goes. Okay, we're ready to now assemble. So I've actually made some green gears up here. The color doesn't really mean much. It's just to show that they're not stock parts, right? I've created these. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to reverse everything. So we're going to put this power gear back on. A couple of convincing taps. And we just want that key to kind of sit inside that channel that's there. Next comes the slide gear shaft. Fits just like that. And don't forget your slide gear. I've put this thing all back together and then have forgotten the slide gear, so don't forget that. And make sure it goes on with the bigger gear facing the power gear. Okay, you don't want to have this thing inverted. Okay, that's the wrong direction. That's the right direction. Next, we can put our collar back on. Okay, and then that little key that we took out from before. So just reverse what we did. Just push that in and kind of center it up so that it's about centered there. And we can place the wheel back on. Little pop. Everything looks good. Just make sure that you've got room between these two, that it slides back and forth, but as long as that pops in there, we're good. And as long as the that little key sits in this power gear over here, you know, as deep as it can, or you know, at least more than flush. Make sure it's more than flush, and as long as this little collar is spinning here and this collar is spinning here, then we're good to go. Next is the other gear shaft. So we're going to take these two off, and you can kind of note there is a proper direction. Okay, so on this shaft, this particular shaft anyways, I know the John Deere is different than this one, but it has one cutaway on this side and two cutaways on the other side. Okay, so you can see those. Maybe I'll do it like that. So two cutaways on one side and one cutaway on the other. I think the John Deere has just one cutaway on the one shaft, and that's it. So what we're going to do is we're going to place our new gear on this shaft, and with the medium gear facing that one cutaway side there. And then the other gear, we're going to take a little spacer Okay, there's a little spacer, and then we're going to take the other gear and place it just like that. And that'll kind of give us what we're needing. So again, the 1 cutaway is on this side with the medium gear, and the 2 cutaway on this axle is facing the other side. So we can place this all back into the gearbox now. And you kind of just fit the middle gear, that medium gear underneath that speed selector. And then the 1 cutaway part, okay, so that part right there has to face to the front of the tractor, so make sure that goes that direction. You can see the little notch down in the gearbox there as well if you remove the grease, or if you kind of clean that up there, but I'm going to leave that in there because we're going to grease this up anyways. And then get that one down, make sure that the other one is vertical, and then it just should sit down inside there. There it goes. So just push down, making sure that these two slide along those 2 plastic pieces around those cutouts, and the one slides down in that one as well. Okay, so that's all ready to rock and roll. What we can do is put a little bit of grease on these gears as well. I like to use white lithium, just seems to be really, really slick stuff. So okay, next comes the wheel axle. So the easiest way I find to do this is to move your speed selector to neutral. And so this is high gear using the medium size gear there, and this is low gear, which shifts to that smaller gear, but neutral just sits right in between there. And we're just going to lift this, you see that crosshair on that collar there? That crosshair actually has to fit inside of that channel that's in both sides of this gearbox. If you don't line those up, this is not going to fit together well, and it's going to have a little bit of space. So if you're finding that you have a little bit of space, then you got to check those collars, make sure they're lined up. So I got the top one lined up, just going to spin the bottom one, line it up as well, and you feel them sit. Once you've got them in there, they'll just sit nice for you. And we'll grease these up as well. Okay, that's way smoother. Now, get a little bit more on this power gear. Okay, so that's really smooth. I mean, it seems to be moving really well. But remember, as I turn this, I can see that this collar has moved a little bit, so I'm going to shift that back just a hair. Let that sit inside there. Check the other one, make sure it's all good. And we can take the bottom end of the gear case. Okay, I've got everything in here. Okay, slide gear, slide shaft, power gear. Make sure everything's there, rather than having to take it apart again. Okay, and it just squeezes together. And again, like I say, make sure that there's no space between these 2 halves. If there is, you got to take this apart and make sure that those collars are sitting properly. So especially check right inside on this seam here and this other seam, make sure there's no space. And there isn't any space in this one, so we can put this back together. I'll get these gears out of the way. There's 5 bolts. Hopefully we still have all 5 of them. And don't tighten these up like crazy. These just have to be kind of snug. So I wouldn't tighten them all. I kind of get them all seated a little bit. And then once they're all started to thread, then I can come around and tighten them a bit more. So again, I'm not going to tighten these down like crazy. There's no reason. Okay, that's enough. That's good. Next, we're going to put on my new collar. Probably not a bad choice to grease this shaft as well. That's basically what allows your tractor to do all of its work. So it's going to sit and spin inside of this black collar that's here. And you can actually grease the outside of this collar as well, because that's going to spin inside of this nylon sleeve. So if there's any kind of restriction, it's going to make it kind of difficult for it to spin. And we can seat that all back inside there. On the John Deere sprinklers, I know that there's a little snap ring in here, so you have to use these snap ring pliers and remove that snap ring before this actually comes out. But on these Orbits, there isn't one. And then we're going to place that back down side. You can see them as I place that worm gear down in there, these wheels actually moved a little bit. So again, we're not going to tighten this up like crazy. I know that the female threads down in the bottom of that gearbox, they actually can snap off pretty easily. So I just use my hands to finger tighten this about, I don't know, not too much. My hands are greasy and I don't want to tighten this up too much. I don't want that to break off in there. Make sure that this is still turning nice, and it looks like it is. And after that, we're just going to put our arms back on. Make sure you got your washer there still, otherwise it'll leak like crazy out of here. You can also get another O-ring for these. Sometimes they wear out. They can be cut. You can see this one here that I took off from this tractor actually is broken, so I'm going to put another one on there. So we'll just use this other arms that I have sitting around here, and O-ring. And we're going to spin these arms up clockwise while I hold the nut with my hands. And once I get that seated, I will take my needle nose pliers again, and this can be tightened quite a bit. I don't want to strip those little plastic threads out. You can see that the O-ring is actually kind of starting to squeeze out here, and everything is back together. We can try and use the speed selector and shift it into gear. And again, to the right is low gear, to the left is high gear. And if you find it's not really going into gear for you, it's just that those gears are not meshing together. You know, they're kind of doing this right now. They're kind of beating against each other. So we want to just rotate those gears a little bit so that they mesh between. And you can do that a couple different ways. You can either rotate the wheels tiny bits, or you can rotate the arms. And while you rotate the arms, you can actually use that speed selector and go into gear. Okay, so now it's in high gear. We're going to attach this tractor and see that it's working. So this is that tractor now back on the hose, and you can see that the wheels are definitely spinning. Hopefully that helps you get your tractor back up and running, and keep watering.